Your brain is lying to you right now, not maliciously, structurally. And once you understand how, you'll never think about money the same way again. Most people believe their circumstances create their mindset. Science says it works the other way. The mental state comes first, always. And what you're about to learn explains why two people can sit in the same room with the same resources and walk out with completely different lives. This isn't about positive thinking. It's about brain architecture. Here's where it starts. Functional MRI research shows that when you vividly imagine something, truly inhabit it with sensory detail and emotion, your brain activates nearly identical neural patterns as actually experiencing it. The fusiform gyrus and mid-level visual cortex, the regions that distinguish imagination from reality, make that call based on signal strength, not content. If the imagined experience is vivid enough, the brain treats it as real, not symbolically, neurologically. That's not a metaphor, that's how the hardware works. So when someone genuinely assumes the internal state of being wealthy, not wishes for it, not hopes for it, but inhabits it, their brain begins processing that state as an existing fact. And that single shift starts a cascade most people never see coming. But before we get to what abundance does to the brain, you need to understand what scarcity does first, because this is where the story gets uncomfortable. In 2013, Harvard economist Senthil Mullainathan and Princeton psychologist Eldar Shafir published research that should have changed how we talk about poverty forever. They found that thinking about financial problems reduces effective cognitive function by approximately 13 to 14 IQ points. That's a greater deficit than operating after 24 hours without sleep. And unlike sleep deprivation, scarcity thinking doesn't end after one bad night. It runs constantly, every day. They tested 464 sugarcane farmers in India before and after harvest. Before harvest, when financial stress was highest, cognitive scores dropped measurably. After harvest, when the stress lifted, scores recovered. Same people, same brains. Different mental state, different cognitive capacity. They called it tunneling. The mind locks onto the scarcity itself and leaves less bandwidth for everything else. Planning, self-control, long-term thinking. The mental resources that would help someone escape poverty are consumed by the experience of being poor. A 2019 study published in PNAS went further. Scarcity mindset, compared to abundance mindset, decreases activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for goal-directed thinking and long-term planning, while increasing activity in the orbitofrontal cortex, which obsesses over what's scarce. The brain physically shifts away from future building and toward present crisis management. And if the stress is chronic enough, cortisol takes over. Persistently elevated cortisol causes dendritic retraction in the prefrontal cortex, the literal physical shrinkage of neuronal branches. The brain's executive center degrades. Not metaphorically, structurally. The mindset creates measurable damage to the organ you need most to change your situation. This is what scarcity does to the brain. Now flip it. When you genuinely assume a wealthy identity, not performance, genuine internal assumption, the dopamine system activates. The ventral striatum and nucleus accumbens fire as though reward has already arrived. This is the same pathway that activates during actual reward. The brain doesn't wait for the bank account to update. It responds to the mental state, and then the reticular activating system gets involved. The RAS is a bundle of nerves at the brainstem that filters reality. Your brain receives over 2 million bits of information per second and consciously processes around 134. The RAS decides what makes it through, based on what you've signaled as important. You've felt this before. You decide to buy a specific car, and suddenly you see it everywhere. The cars were always there. Your filter changed. When you assume a wealthy identity, the RAS begins flagging opportunities, patterns, and connections aligned with that belief. Conversations that would have passed unnoticed now register. A comment, a contact, an idea. The filter is open to it. Stanford research found that individuals with positive money associations show increased activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, correlating with better real-world financial outcomes. This is not mystical. This is filtration. The prefrontal cortex activation matters too. Positive cognitive reframing, thinking from the perspective of someone who already has wealth, strengthens executive function and impulse control in real time. The scarcity mindset weakens it. The abundance assumption improves the quality of your actual decisions while you hold it, not later. Now, Neville Goddard taught this in 1944. He called it the law of assumption. You must assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled until your assumption has all the sensory vividness of reality. He said the feeling of wealth, not merely the thought of it, was what mattered. He described a specific practice he called sadness, state akin to sleep, where you use the drowsy moments before falling asleep to implant new assumptions directly into the subconscious. In 2013, Neuroscience confirmed that theta brainwaves, the 4 to 8 hertz range, active during light sleep and deep meditation, are the state in which the brain is most receptive to forming new neural connections and dissolving entrenched beliefs. Goddard described the mechanism 70 years before the instruments existed to measure it. The Kabbalion, published in 1908 and rooted in Hermetic philosophy attributed to ancient Egypt, described mental transmutation, the deliberate practice of shifting consciousness from one pole to another along the same axis. Poverty and abundance are not opposites in separate categories. They're degrees on the same spectrum. You change the degree through deliberate mental practice. The text describes this as an art, a skill, something trained. Cognitive behavioral therapy calls the same process cognitive restructuring. Same mechanism, different century, different vocabulary. The Bible, thousands of years before either, said it plainly. Proverbs 23:7. As he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Not as he wishes. Not as he hopes, as he thinks. In his heart, meaning in the deep, unconditional belief beneath the surface thoughts. Mark 11:24 goes further. Believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. The instruction is to assume receipt before evidence. Romans 12:2 uses the Greek word metamorphoet, metamorphosis, for what happens when the mind is renewed. Transformation through mental reprogramming. James Allen read those texts in 1903 and wrote, "As a man thinketh." His core argument, a man is literally what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all his thoughts. He anticipated neuroplasticity research by a century. The principle hasn't changed, because it doesn't need to. Then there's Amy Cuddy. Her research at Harvard Business School showed that holding expansive, dominant body postures for just 2 minutes increases testosterone by approximately 20% and decreases cortisol by approximately 25% before any external achievement, before any result. The physiology of confidence changes the hormonal environment before the circumstance does. The assumption precedes the evidence. The body is an entry point. She called it fake it till you become it, not till you make it. Become it. The distinction is everything. Here's what all of this builds toward. The brain operates through prediction. It constantly anticipates based on existing beliefs and filters experience to confirm those predictions. Dr. Alia Crum at Stanford's Mind and Body Lab studies how mindsets alter objective outcomes through behavioral, psychological, and physiological channels. Not just how people feel, but what they measurably do and achieve. When you assume the identity of someone who is already wealthy, you trigger a self-reinforcing loop. The RAS filters for aligned information. Dopamine creates momentum toward aligned action. The prefrontal cortex makes better decisions. Neuroplasticity wires in new pathways with each repetition. The identity drives behavior. Behavior creates results. Results reinforce identity. The loop runs in both directions, and you choose which direction it runs by choosing the assumption you maintain. The scarcity loop costs you 13 IQ points a day and physically degrades your brain over time. The abundance loop activates your reward system, sharpens your decision-making, opens your filter, and rewires your architecture toward the life you're claiming. You don't need to have it yet. You need to assume it, fully, emotionally, persistently, until the brain stops distinguishing between imagination and reality. Because as the research shows, given enough vividness, it already can't. Starting right now. Not someday, not when the numbers change. Assume it. Hold the internal state of someone who already has what you're building toward. Not as a trick, as a neurological decision. The brain you're changing is the same brain making every choice between here and there. Change the brain first. Everything else follows.